Well, welcome everybody. It's good to see the sun out and see you all. You're all bright and shiny faces this morning, and I understand we may be in the upswing as far as getting more sunshine this week. Just a couple short comments before we get underway. Of course, many of you know Charles Casey has been recovering from an operation, and he's doing very well. And he would have been here today, except they came down with, he and his wife came down with some kind of a sore throat, chest cold this last couple of days, and they didn't want to risk it not giving it to us too. So do keep him in his prayers. Also, Barbara Harless, I think most of you know Barbara. She's facing an operation, removing a kidney stone, and it's something that been giving her some difficulty, so keep her in your prayers too, if you would. And then the other, I got a phone call this morning. It's something that everybody likes to hear when they plan these events, that our one speaker was snowed in up in Appleton, Wisconsin. He was supposed to be here today and could not get out, and he's be coming in tomorrow. It's Mark Olson, our president. And I said, well, how much snow you're going to get there? And they said, well, probably about a foot. And I guess that's average for them up there in the Wisconsin area, though. But they shut the airport down. So we are going to proceed on our own. If you all will stand, I'm going to ask Mr. Bill Russell to lead us in a prayer. And we don't have anything with a flag on it, so we'll just do the pledge, and I'll lead you in the pledge. Ms. Russell.
Just bow with me, please. Father in heaven, it is a real privilege for we, your creatures, to bow before you today. To come to you in prayer, to come to you with concerns and thankfulness, and also, Lord, your great mercy and grace. We just thank you for the day. We pray for these that we've heard about now that are ill and perhaps facing surgery. We ask you to be with them. And Father, we just thank you for the nation that you founded, that you gave us. And it pains us to see how Satan has ravaged this land and ravaged the people in it. We pray, Lord, that you will send your Spirit to guard and guide the people in this country, to turn us back to you. We thank you for President Trump and his attempts to do what is right. And we ask for wisdom for him. We ask for your protection. And we thank you for the Lord Jesus Christ, above all, who we claim as our Savior and Lord. Thank you for this food and this meeting. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. I'm going to set this up here so you might be able to see the American flag in this corner right here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. Well, let's go around the table. I think we have a few guests here. Dennis, it's good to see you back this morning, and welcome. And I think there's a gentleman in the back there. Introduce yourself.
David Kemp.
David, appreciate you being here. And I think everybody else here is pretty much a regular, so we appreciate you coming out. I'm going to make a few comments on the bulletin and hit a few of the highlights. Art Thompson, our president, who, by the way, spoke here in Dallas a few weeks ago at an evening meeting. They had the executive committee meeting at the John Birch Society here. We had a dinner that night. Art was a speaker. And we were real pleased because we had 4 cases of the new book he wrote. Every one of them was gone by the time the evening was over with, and I think he autographed every one of them too. But he said, you know, there's 2 main focuses we're working on and this spring, and that is number 1 is not only to stop the call for a constitutional convention, but to get some states to rescind their call for a constitutional convention. And he relates back to Scalia and what Scalia said, that don't try this, don't even go near trying to do it today. And I think with what we were facing with in the left in this last election, I think you could see the power and the money they would put into trying to totally take over a convention and run it. And the money they would have to tie the whole thing up in court cases anyway, and to get their delegates on there. And he said the second one is to stop this USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada agreement. And what's interesting about this, we're calling it an agreement, Canada's calling it a treaty, and Mexico's calling it a treaty too. And I don't know if that has just something to do with the way their parliaments work, or just how, that they do have different names for it. But anyway, it has to, since we're calling it an agreement, it has to be voted on both in the Senate and the House. And generally what the situation is on it right now, because of the fight over closing the government down and the wall, that things have been delayed. And so we're looking probably for this, unless something else comes down the pike here that's going to delay it further, that probably around March and April they may make a move in order to try to bring it up for a vote either in the Senate and the House. One encouraging thing happened in the Senate though. Grassley, who's head of the Senate committee that's going to be holding hearings on the committee, made a statement. He says, we got to take a thorough look at this thing. And he said there's some things in there we got to get some answers to. So that may mean that he's responding to some of the pressure and the contacts from our members and that we're putting on them. But anyway, he said that in this drive for this agreement, it's a move and a war to lock the United States into a new world order, to get us into this regional government North American Union, just like the European Union, and to lock us into it. He said there's nothing new. He said this has been going on since the early 1900s with some of the moves they made then on changing our tax system, our banking system, back all the way into 1913. But he goes on to say the other side knows what they're doing on this. It's not just a bunch of naive people or stupid people, and they know what they're doing. And he said, Karl Marx told them. And he put this quote in here from Karl Marx, and I'm just going to read it. He says, generally speaking, the protective system in these days is conservative, while the free trade system works destructively. It breaks up old nationalities and carries antagonisms of proletariat and bourgeoisie to the utmost point. In a word, the free trade system hastens the social revolution. And in this revolutionary sense alone, gentlemen, I'm in favor of free trade. So you can see how Karl Marx was looking at this and breaking up the sovereignty of the nations. And we battled this with a lot of politicians today. That battle with Ted Cruz. And some of our conservative politicians think that there's something wonderful because it's called free trade. And this was really driven home to me last month up in Midland, Texas. KWEL radio stations, the all talk radio station there, and the owner of the station's a member. And he told me that he was having Congressman Conaway, their congressman up there, to interview him. And I said, how long do you have? And he said, he's only going to give us a half an hour. And I said, well, do you mind if I called in and talked to him about this trade agreement? And he said, no. He said, just as soon as we start the program, get in there to see if we can get you up front right away. Well, I wasn't the first caller. Ended up being the second caller. And I told Congressman Conaway my concerns, and I said, Congressman Conaway, have you read this? And there was dead silence on the other side. And I says, have you read all 1,800 pages and all 35 chapters? And he said, no. I said, do you know what's in it? He said, no. I said, well, there's 4 areas I'd like you to take a look at. And I spelled out those 4 areas. And one of them is why, when they formed this hemispheric committee over all our natural resources, including oil and gas, mining, farming, everything in that realm. And this committee is an entity is going to control it in the whole northern hemisphere. Why is Mexico exempt from the regulations? And it only applies to Canada and the United States. It was dead silent. He said, I didn't know that. I said, number two, it becomes a living entity on itself according to the agreement itself. It says once this agreement is approved, it becomes a living entity and they can make any changes, dismiss people, put people on, form any committees, change the rules, regulations, whatever they want to do without consent of any of the governments of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Dead silence. He said, what's the next one? And I said, well, it says in there, he said, you remember when Trump made a speech in the United Nations and he talked about we weren't going to get involved in these UN treaties and we were going to protect the sovereignty of the United States? He said, yes. I said, this agreement completely undoes that. It says once it's approved, we agree to every United Nations treaty, and specifically lists some in there at the treaty, like the Law of the Sea and the Climate Change Treaty in the agreement, that we agree to that right away and will be part of it and enact it in any future treaties by the United Nations too, and agree to work with the United Nations on all their agreements and entities. Of course, they got one to take away guns too. I think many of you, of course, are aware of that. There's dead silence, and he said, well, would you call my aide on that? And I said, well, yeah, what's his phone number? And he gave it over the air. And I'm hoping the members that were listening all copied it down. Anyway, after the conversation was over with, I called the aide, went through this more in depth with him. He said, we hadn't heard any of this. In fact, we've heard very little about anything about this. So I gave some chapter and verses and everything to look at it, and then I emailed him a couple of our reprints. And he said that, yeah, he would study it and talk to the congressman about it. And I said, well, don't be surprised if we get some more phone calls on this as information gets out on it. But this is what we're faced with the congressmen and senators. They haven't read this. The hardcore left knows what's in it, knows what's behind it. And most of the congressmen and senators, they're going to accept what they get from a study from the Brookings Institute or Council on Foreign Relations that has a bullet point outline of why they ought to support it, and which bypasses the whole meat of the whole thing, though, in doing that. So that's why it's very important, particularly in the weeks ahead, you get ahead of your congressman and your senator on this, particularly if they're new. We got somebody new, Allred, that replaced Sessions. Have no idea. He probably doesn't even know what this thing is, and he's going to be voting on it someday. But anyway, it's going to be up to us to get the job done because there's nobody out there that's going to do it. And let's make sure we burn those lines up. Fax, email, text, however you phone call. And listen, when you phone call the local office in Dallas. Phone call their district office, because they do track those things in the district office, and then that congressman gets a rundown on that report every day of the phone calls that came in and what people were asking about. Well, Art goes a little bit deeper into the Illuminati and the battle in our country and how our founders, particularly Adams and Washington and everything, realized that they knew we were up against some evil forces, and they were doing everything they could in order to form in the formation of this country in order to protect our freedom and our sovereignty and give us a framework in that regard. And we ended up being something different, where the power came from the people, the consent of the people, not from the consent of the government and what they wanted to do. And he said, if you really want to read something good, read the book Mainline by Senator George Malone of Nevada, published in 1958, on the free trade movement in the New World Order. Because back in 1958, Senator Malone nailed it. He knew what was happening on these so-called free trade agreements. But this whole drive to put us in the New World Order, it started with GATT, the WTO, the United Nations. And I tell some of our prospects today, I said, you think Trump had been attacked by the press? You should have seen it back in the early years, in the early late 50s and early 60s, when we came out against the United Nations and for getting us out of the United Nations. I mean, the attacks were endless. You couldn't turn on your radio or TV but not hear an attack on the Birch Society on that. Because at that time, the United Nations was being promoted as man's best hope for peace. It's our last hope for peace, and we should be wholeheartedly for it. Now, there's been a lot, as Art points out in here, a lot of people behind the scenes that have been pushing us into changing our government into this new world order. And he says they include people like Assistant Secretary of Treasury Harry Dexter White, Lachlan Curry, Elger Hiss, Virginia Franco, and Harold Glasser, just to name a few. And how they had worked together in order to, in essence, expand the whole communist apparatus throughout the United States and throughout the world. He also warns us about the Council on Foreign Relations. They know what this battle's about. And as Kristen Whitten of the Center for National Interests, run by members of the CFR, by the way, said, to paraphrase he said, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, this isn't the beginning of the end. This may be the end of the beginning of creating a new world order of trade. I'm speaking about this new trade agreement. So they know what's going on, and just to see the elation from, I think his name is Haas, H-A-A-S, from the Council on Foreign Relations, on the board of the council, when he looked at the final agreement, he said, this is NAFTA on steroids. This is NAFTA plus TTP plus about 10 to 20% more. Now that's the guy that his organization's been promoting and pushing this thing. And of course, the man that helped put it together and was our chief negotiator on this, Lighthizer, the 20-year member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and everybody he had working with him on negotiating that treaty were all from the Obama administration. So we got our work cut out for us on this, so let's get to work on this. Write some letters to the editor on it, looks into the talk shows. You know, there's a couple of talk shows here that you could get your message out in. I think about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There's Rick Roberts comes on at WFAA. He's a good one to call into. There's some that comes in. There's another one later than that in the afternoon. Some of the morning talk shows too. What's so aggravating about it, they usually just respond to the biggest thing in the media that day, and they try to drive the subject that way. But if you can handle yourself just right, you can bring up some of the local issues or some issues like this, and if somebody does call in on one, back them up. Get on that phone and back them up on it, because we're going to get people talking about it. We are happy to announce that 2 states have rescission movements in on the CONCON, New Hampshire and Nebraska, and that also that Virginia has killed the CONCON and call for a constitutional convention in their legislative body. So the battle's going on and will continue going on in the months ahead on this, and there's a new wrinkle on this, and it's being led by a guy named Lawrence Lessig, L-E-S-S-I-G, to do away with electoral college by having this national popular vote for the president of some kind of combine of states. And basically how it would work, they would put together about 5 states, and everybody in those 5 states in that combine would agree that if the majority of vote in those 5 states were for a particular candidate, all the electoral college votes would be for that candidate, even though maybe 3 states only supported the candidate, 2 voted against that candidate. All their electoral votes would be counted for. And this is just a continuing fight by the left in order to do away with the electoral college. So be sure to read the bulletin. There's a wealth of information in here. And at 2 o'clock this afternoon, if you get home on time, go to the John Birch Society's Facebook page And Art Thompson has a 1-hour commentary he does every Tuesday at 2 o'clock. And it's usually on a very fresh subject and a very critical one. Carl Voiksberger has spent some time on the State Republic Seg Committee, and he's kept his eyes and ears on the committee. And they had their first meeting, and I asked him to take a couple minutes and just brief you on what was decided at that first meeting. Carl.
Thank you, Bill. Hi, it's good to see you all today. Hope everyone's feeling well. I'm sure that we would have more folks here if there wasn't so much of the flu and all that going around. Down in Austin, I didn't actually go to the meeting, but I have read several emails and a summary from the state chair. You know, there's always a controversy down there at every meeting. They have their meetings 4 times a year, so they have at least 4 controversies per year. And the big one this time was whether or not we should pay our state chairman instead of him having to split his time between his business and the state party, you know, so that he could dedicate full time to the state party job. And fortunately, I think for him, the quarterly meeting came after the midterm election in November. And you all noticed, I guess, the results from that election. We had some people, including our Senator Cruz and even our governor, who barely won against very unqualified people, and kind of a scary situation. Bottom line is, there was still a lot of dissension about paying him. And so one of the members, Kathleen Wall, forget what senatorial district she's from, but she offered to pay his salary for the first year and wrote a check right on the spot. And yeah, that's the kind of SREC members you need, right? But the bottom line is, the state chair is also a member of the Republican National Committee. Each state sends 3 members. And so that state chair position afforded him an opportunity to speak there to the committee. And Senator Cornyn went also and backed him up. And they pleaded for help from the National Party so that Texas doesn't turn blue in 2020. The thinking is that if Texas turns blue, we'll never elect another conservative or liberty-minded president as long as we live. The other thing that you need to know is that they set the budget like at least twice as high as they've ever set it before. They set it at $5 million, and they have a plan to hire on 24 staff to spread around the whole state and get everybody active. You know, your county parties should be doing the job there, but often they're not, so they need a little bit of help from the state party. So we see help coming from the national party down to the state party, and from the state party down to the county parties. I think it may work. I hope it'll work.
I was listening to a radio interview with Dickie here a couple of days ago on a podcast, and he just came out and admitted that they got caught short in this last election. They were out-organized, outspent, and didn't realize the forces they were up to, and just barely responded in time. And I think a lot of you felt the same way, that how bad it was. Our project is, we need to get a couple things. Number one, we have a new DVD coming out. It's going to be on the trade agreement. And it's going to be more or less geared for the average person to get them aware of what's taking place, to send it to our congressmen and our senators and start passing it around. And I'd like to get a good supply of those and have them here at the meeting next month for you all. And you can take what copies that you want for your needs. And of course, we'll probably use a few copies ourselves and get them in the hands of a few people that we want to make sure that we get the DVD to. And we also want to get a supply of Art Thompson's books and have them on hand too. So I'm going to pass the form around. If you want to give cash, just put your name on there and that cash and just clip it to the board. If you want a billing, just put your name and address on there and how much you'd like to be billed for. And all checks will be made out to Seminar. So we'll pass this around as we get into our program. And this helps us get a lot of this material out and get it in your hands too, so you can use it at very strategic times. We are going to have a drawing after the speaker, and so if you haven't got your ticket, see Tom Brashear, and he'll make sure that your ticket, you get a ticket, you get one in the plate up here. One reason we're a little thin today is we have a contingent down at downtown Dallas right now at one of the meetings. I'm trying to form this, trying to stop this police review board. And they were at a meeting yesterday, and I don't know if you saw the morning news, but it says here, Dallas Citizens Police Review Board, all sides bash proposal. And they got a picture of some of the people there, and I recognized two Birchers right away that belong to our group in this picture. And it's, they're very dedicated. They're working very hard on this. But it brought up some questions. Is what is this battle on the Dallas Police Review Board all about? Because it's not a new fight. What are they trying to do here? And as it says in the article, they want to form this board and give it a budget and kind of have it a living entity where they can make their own replacements. And there's a lot of other questions that come up on it too. They were talking, I think it even came out with some of the people on the board have salaries or what. But that's all in the discussion stage. But it's interesting that one of the people driving this is, of course, Police Chief Renee Hall from Detroit. She's coming in here, and her attitude is that yeah, we've been working on this thing so long, we got to get us through here. And that's her general attitude. Yes.
Bill, Lynn and I went to that meeting yesterday, and one of the big things there is that they want effectively subpoena power so that they can bring a policeman in and put him under oath. Mm-hmm. Now, they're kind of dancing around that, but that is a very, very dangerous thing. We don't have enough police anyway, and we start trying to do that kind of thing, we will not be safe in a city.
I think we're about 1,000 police short, aren't we, in Dallas? Well, this has brought up a lot of questions from particularly some of our newer members and some of you out there. What is this battle all about? Because this was a battle that raged back in the 60s. And one of the men that was deeply involved in that fight, particularly locally, and helped with one of the leaders, gave his leadership abilities to the Support Your Local Police Committee, is Mr. Bill Caruth. And of course, we're all familiar with the Caruth name here in Dallas. It's a pioneering family that helped build this city and found this city. And Bill has always had a real deep interest into particularly the law enforcement police situation here in Dallas. And he took a very active part in at the early years in fighting the moves by the left back then to form a Support Your Local Police Committee. I mean, to form a civilian review board, like fighting it with our Support Your Local Police Committee. And that's where I met him and got involved with it too. And it was an interesting battle back then. But you saw then even how the left was organized, you know, trying to hamstring our police and trying to bring it in a position where we could eventually have a federal police force run by the federal government, and the local police won't have any word or say about anything. So I've asked Bill to give you a rundown on the initial background on this fight. some of the arguments that the left uses on this. And then, of course, I know he's talked to a city councilman. He's been at one of the meetings too. And to fill you in on that, and then we'll throw it open for questions and answers too. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Bill Crew.
We got a little short notice on this. Bill called me yesterday and said I was going to come and talk today. So I will just give you that warning to start with. About the Police Review Board, the first thing you have to wonder about on any attempt to start a new organization or a new board in the government is, what's the justification? Who wants it and why? Why do we need, or who would say we needed a police review board? Well, there are a number of groups out there that say that we need a police review board because the police have not been doing their job or have been overzealous, you might say, in persecuting certain ethnic groups. These are the people that are very much opposed to police. They think that they should not be treated and arrested as often as they are. The reason they give this as a justification is they look at the numbers. It's obvious. Certain ethnic groups are arrested more often than others, and they are dealt with by the police more often than others. So if you assume that everybody is equal, then there must be something wrong, because these people shouldn't be arrested more than anybody else. The one thing they never even bring up is the thought that they may be being arrested because they commit crime more often than other people do. And if that being the case, then they should be arrested and they should be dealt with. Now, the reason that they commit more crime is not part of our discussion here. It could take a long, long time to talk about why some people and some groups commit more crimes than others. It used to be saying, well, these were minority groups that did this, but that's not so anymore, because the people in this room, Anglo-Caucasians, only represent 30% of the population in Dallas. So we're the minority in Dallas, not they. When you get down to the committee, you have to decide who is going to be on this committee. What qualifications do they have? And if you look at the proposals, you'll see what qualifications they have. And one qualification that is not in any of them is a familiarity with police work. These should be people who do not know anything about police work. Now, we watch television, and you know, after you watch a few police shows, you get to be an expert on what police are supposed to do, but that's not really the case. Before you become a police officer, you have several months of class that you have to go through. It's not just something you walk out and do naturally. It's a specialized occupation. So what are we talking about when we talk about the people on these committees? They may be very smart. They may be good lawyers. They may be good preachers. They may be good real estate people. They may be good at a whole lot of things. But what they don't know anything about is police work. So essentially, you're requiring a pooling of ignorance would be the ones that would be judging our police officers. And this is a very specialized job, and not just, I mean, we all think about how dangerous it is. It is. We've had police officers killed in Dallas, all too many of them. One of them's too many, but they're in danger every day. But these people would be second guessing a police officer who's been to class, who's had experience on the street, who's spent a lot of time doing that, and these are people who know nothing about his job, will then say, oh, well, we will determine whether you did your job right or not. That's really a very strange way of looking at things. I don't think that you'd want to have somebody doing medical malpractice suits that had never had any medical experience, anything like that. It's just very strange that the people who would be judging police officers, and as I say, they want subpoena power to bring them in. They want to have opportunity to make sure the guy gets fired or the person gets fired. They want to have control over these police. These are people whose only requirement is that they know nothing about police work. They are the ones that would want to be determining the police officer's future. The other thing there you think about is how will they do it? Is there anybody else that's judging this? I mean, are the police totally unsupervised? Is that the problem? No, the police are supervised. You've got an internal affairs division in the police department, and people say, oh, well, that's police investigating the police. That's all the same club. It won't work. Well, no, they are not the same club. I'll guarantee you that there's nobody who is more opposed to a bad police officer than the good police officers. And most of the police officers are the good guys. So there are people who are experienced police officers who will be judging whether a man did his job or not, or whether a policeman did his job or not. And they are doing their job. In addition to that, the city council theoretically should be checking if there's any really abuse within the police department, and the mayor. There are all sorts of people who should be watching the police department already. So why do we need another agency in there? Another agency? We talk about government agencies. They always had a tendency to grow. They don't ever seem to get smaller. They always seem to get a little bigger. And there is a police review board in Detroit where our police chief came from. I don't know how it got started, or when it got started, or what the budget was then, but now the budget is over $1 million a year for administrative aides and people who are working for the Civilian Review Board. Now, if you're going to spend $1 million a year, I think I would rather try to hire an additional police officer than to hire a bunch of clerks and bureaucrats to look after and harass a police officer that's trying to do his job. What would be the effect on the police force if we do this? What are we saying? When we say that the police need to have another agency, we're saying that we need to be able to subpoena police officers and bring them in before a committee that is a civilian committee. Well, what we're saying is that the police officers were not telling the truth when they went before the police internal review board. We're saying that the internal review board in the police department is either lying or too stupid to figure out what really happened to that police officer. So you are stating implication that police officers are liars, or police officers are incompetent, or that the internal affairs department is incompetent or is not willing to do his job. Now, having gone to the policemen and the police recruits and saying, we think you're liars and incompetent, is that a good recruiting tool? We're trying to get more police officers. As you mentioned, we have, depending on who's writing the numbers, at least 300, but more likely 1,000 police officers that we're short in Dallas. When you call the police now, the response times are getting longer all the time because there's not enough police to go around. And in order to recruit more police officers, you say, we think our policemen are liars and incompetent. Would you please join us? From every direction, it's a bad idea. Short talk, that's all there is to it, though. Oh, Bill says I should answer questions, yeah.
Bill, one of the things that came up, the police chief made a great presentation.
She's a very sharp lady.
Talking about very detailed. She obviously spent a month of our tax money building this multi-slide presentation. But even after that was presented, the council members that were there that are part of the committee that oversees this kind of thing, even they could not agree on what should be done. But some of them were even saying it's impossible. You should not ask for the Citizens Review Board to have police training or know anything about it.
Oh, yeah, that's the,
I mean,
one thing they all agree on
they
is,
actually
that
said
these guys,
that in public.
yeah, ignorance is one of the requirements. You can't know anything about police work to be on this board. Yes, sir.
Okay, so if a policeman has a problem, goes to internal review, and then it goes to the police review board, why is that not double jeopardy?
Well, he's not been tried yet. Now, that is also one of the things, if a policeman does something really wrong, he gets to try. He is tried, like this woman now that we're seeing that walked into the wrong apartment and shot the guy. It's not a question of internal review, it's a question of she's gonna go to trial and the district attorney is gonna try to convict her of murder. This is something that every police officer faces every time he walks into a room. It's not just internal review that they have to face. They are liable for everything they do in court. And so they still would be under this new thing, except the civilian review board might be able to punish them when the court would not be willing to punish them because they didn't do anything wrong.
One of the things that was very telltale to me is the fact that this coalition they referred to, there's about 20 groups, Black Lives Matter, CARE of all things, I can't begin to name all, but every single one of them has an anti-police bias, and that's the one the city council has conferred with, and they're listening to their story, and they kept talking about them having a seat at the table. And of course, they want each council person, I think there's 15 of them, would want to appoint their own representative. One thing I was impressed with was the police chief recommendation was that she would want only 7 or 8 representatives on that board, and they would come from each of the police districts, which made sense, I thought.
Yeah, well, yeah, none of the council members not have their opportunity to appoint somebody taken away. But you're right, and we don't know it for sure, but the assumption would be that these anti-police groups are the ones that would make enough noise that would be who could be appointed to the board.
Exactly.
Bill, one other thing that came up was that board is not asking, or the people supporting that board are not asking for $1 million. They're asking for $3 million.
To start with, $3 million, yes. It's, and
how many policemen could you train and hire for that kind of money?
if we could find some police guys that wanted to come and be part of Dallas Police Force, now that we've said that we don't like them.
Yeah. Well, certainly our taxpayer money would be much better spent hiring police.
Amen. Amen. Anything we can do to get some more guys out on the street. We could increase their pay. I mean, it's really silly when a police officer resigns from the Dallas and goes to Richardson and gets an increase in pay, or Mesquite or Allen or most any place around here, they're paying more than Dallas. At least we gave them a little bit of an increase this last year, and that helped. But if they've got the biggest job, they ought to have the biggest paycheck.
Well, is there a push to have substance review board for sheriff's departments? We got counties in Texas where the sheriff's pretty much all in police force.
Amen. I know one. I live in one.
You live in one.
Fort Davis, yeah. There is. There is no city there. I mean, the town of Fort Davis is not incorporated. So the county sheriff is the police force. And same thing, I know I've got a place in Glen Rose too. And Somerville County, I was a deputy sheriff down there for a little while. We were the only law enforcement. Well, the highway patrol came through, but it was different then. They got uniforms now. I was down there the other day. These people get, the only thing, when we were back there, we were, well, they just assumed we were the sheriffs because we wore our guns on the outside.
Are they gonna have a review board?
I doubt it. I doubt it. But it depends. If they get big enough, then there will be these groups that want to restrict their activities. And that's the whole idea. I mean, there's no reason to have a review board unless you want to restrict the activities of what the police are doing now. If you thought they were doing enough or doing a good job, then you don't need to have a new review board. If you think they're doing too much, then you want to have a review board to cut it back. Now, what they're doing too much of is arresting criminals. And the reason to have a review board is to restrict them so they don't arrest as many criminals. It's a pretty simple way of putting it.
Well, the thing that kept coming up at the meeting was the word community, community, community. When it was referring to these 20 or 25 odd
Yeah.
far left-wing groups that don't like police anyway.
That's the community we're responding to.
Everything was about the community. We have community input, community input.
Yeah.
Well, they were well, I guess, informed of what the community wants.
Yeah, well, the one thing that has been proposed that I can agree with is they say it should be easier for someone to make a complaint about police action that they think was wrong. And right now it's rather tedious, and you go in and you've got to find a form, and anyhow. If they want to make it a little bit easier to report something wrong with the police force, yeah, that's all right. But at the same time, I think you ought to make it clear that if you report falsely, you will be punished for a false report, and a false accusation. The two go together. Yes, sir?
In one of the town hall meetings, I asked how many complaints we're talking about. No one on the coalition group could answer that, but a deputy came in and said in 2018, he said there's about 600 complaints. 200 of them were things like, I got a speeding ticket from this police officer. You should have done that, so we would have reported. 200 of them were just, they didn't like the way it looked or something, and 200 of them went to review. And then out of those 200, 18 of them went to the actual review board. So they're doing all this for like, Dallas is a huge city. I don't know how many interactions with police there are in a year, but it's not that big a problem.
It's not a problem unless you happen to be one of these groups or individuals that feels like they are restricting your opportunity to commit crimes, which is, after all, why we hired the police in the first place.
At the meeting yesterday, were those that were interested in saying anything about them being against the forming of a police review board permitted to speak?
No, we couldn't even hold up our signs.
Now, not the meeting yesterday, but I've been to some of the smaller meetings, and yes, I was allowed to talk.
Okay.
And so were some other people. Matter of fact, virtually everyone who spoke at the meeting where I was opposed to the police review board. One guy was on the other side. He was distinctly in the minority.
Is the vote totally up to our current Dallas City Council?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how is it stacked?
That's, I would hate to say it, but it looks like the fix is in. Yes, sir.
You answered, in answering his question, you kind of answered one of my questions.
What's that?
About how things with the city council is looking toward this civilian review board. You said the deck is stacked. Okay, that's an answer. Now, you said that you give a 30% figure for Caucasian.
It's 30-some-odd%.
Is it the county or the city?
No, this is the city of Dallas.
The city, okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Something else that wasn't addressed is the so-called Ferguson effect, which we've seen when the police start having these reviews. They pull back. They're not so
Sure.
active in policing. They'd rather just slow down and quit policing.
Amen.
It has a very detrimental effect on our protection.
Yeah, a lot of the police work, and I've ridden with them and spent some time in the police cars and a lot of different things for different times, and a lot of it requires a certain amount of initiative. Like one particular instance, I remember there was a police officer I was riding with, and he saw a guy going down the road, and he had his arm around another guy, and they were just talking as they went along, and the guy with his arm around the other guy known to the police, shall we say. And they went down an alley, and the officer was just driving by, and he thought, that's not right. So he went back, turned his car around, got out of the car, went down that alley, and it turned out that the guy with his arm around him had a knife at the man's throat and was going down to have a discussion with him about some money he felt was owed to him. Now, first, you know your territory, but being willing to walk down a dark alley to look for trouble is something you don't have to do, even if you're a police officer. You don't have to do that, but he did it because that's part of what he saw as his job. But if you're working to the rule, you don't go down that alley. You just keep on driving and wait until somebody jumps out in front of the car to stop you. But yes, that working to the rule or the Ferguson effect, it very definitely makes a difference.
In the past, in cities where review boards have been successful in establishing themselves, how have they later been defeated? By stacking the city council members and...
I don't know any place where one was abolished.
Wow.
It's a typical bureaucratic event, yeah. Yes, sir.
Did you say that Black Lives Matter was part of the group there that wanted the review board?
They are, yes.
Well, what do they want? They want targets on the cops they want to kill or what?
No, they're saying is that the police harass the blacks more than they do, more than they should.
Well, didn't they shoot 5 or 6?
Technically, that was an individual, but it was sort of ironic that the 5 officers that were killed at the time when they were protecting a anti-police rally. But they were the good guys, and they suffered for it.
Bill, do you know whether it was the police chief that told them to leave their vests at home, protective vests?
Well, they were the vests were in the trunk. They were told not to dress in tactical equipment by Chief Brown because it just didn't look good to have the guys out there in ninja suits at the this parade, which was about police activity anyway. So yes, they were told that. I personally know the officer who was in front chasing the guy up that did it up into the school, and he was behind one corner and the other guy was behind the other corner, and they were each shooting through the deal, and he had to send somebody down to get his vest out of the car. He's a very bright young man, and he said that we were always taught, said just, I'm going home. That's what we were told to always tell ourselves, says, I'm going home tonight. And he says, at that particular time, behind that corner of the wall with the bullets coming through it, he says, I didn't know if I was going home tonight.
Do you have an opinion about our lady police chief?
I have met her on several occasions. Matter of fact, she had lunch at our house Friday. So I have met her. She is very articulate. She's a bright lady. I do not have any strong opinions on her activities as a police chief yet. I, of course, disagree with the idea about the police review board. I know police within the department who don't care for her, and some that have thought that she's a pretty good lady. So I think I will give her...
What does she think about the review board?
Oh, she's all for it.
All for it?
She's all for the review board. And she came from Detroit where they've got a review board.
Yeah.
They got a much more powerful review board than we are trying to put in here. Some of the groups that he was talking about don't like what she said because she did want to reduce the number of people on the board and did not ask for subpoena power. So she didn't ask for everything that they wanted, but she does want the review board,
She
yes.
also advocated for training them too. She wanted the board to be.
Have a little idea about what they're doing?
Yeah.
Gee, that's revolutionary. Yes, sir.
Do you happen to have any comments about how crime just plummeted when they had a review board? Or is it the reality?
I haven't seen crime plummeting where they had a review board.
Absolutely.
Now, I have seen in Dallas that the crime rate, reported crime rate, has gone down. But I also know from talking to my police friends that the rate did not go down. It was the reported rate that went down because they're not allowed to report some things, and they have redefined what a crime is so that it doesn't show up on the record. And, you know, little things like, and now this is not under the current police chief, this was under Brown. And he put out a rule that if you were arrested for shoplifting, for instance, the report had to go out giving the name and address, home address of the person who reported the shoplifting. Now, that means that all of their friends could come after you. So the number of shoplifting reports went down. Did that mean there was less shoplifting? No, that meant there was less reported shoplifting. Yes, sir.
The other thing to add to that is I was talking to employees at Walmart, and they literally have stopped confronting anybody that they know is stealing, walking out the store. It's gotten so bad, they just don't want to deal with it.
Well, if you got to give your home number to the guy so he and his gang will know where you live, I think I'd hesitate to confront somebody too. So the reported crime rate is not the same as the crime rate. It can be going in different directions.
What is the rationale for having to publish that number?
Well, the FBI publishes crime rate numbers. They've got an annual report and they put out.
I mean, his home telephone number.
Oh, no, well, I don't know. I didn't get to ask Chief Brown why he wanted to publicize that. I would have thought it was pretty obvious. You don't want to let somebody know.
That's right.
Yeah, but he did. And so shoplifting went down. Reported shoplifting went down.
Maybe he just wanted his statistics to look better.
Absolutely, he wanted his statistics. And they went down for 10 years, and it worked.
And it worked.
And it worked.
Bill, do you see any kind of a conflict develop between grand jury investigation and what a police review board would come out with?
Conflict between the grand jury investigation and the police review board, that would depend on whether they were investigating the same incident or not, and they not necessarily, because a lot of these things that the police review board would investigate would never get to a grand jury because they're not really crimes. They're just sort of the time, you know, the policeman wasn't polite or something happened like that. Now, if it went before a grand jury, yeah, I could see where there'd be a conflict. But most of what the review board would see would not necessarily rise to the level of being an indictment. And you got to have an indictment before it goes to the grand jury. Okay, well, and gentlemen, ladies, thank you.
Well, if you get your tickets out, we'll have our drawing. You'll find the intelligence brief on the back table back there from the Support Your Local Police, our Support Your Local Police operation. It has a breakdown of some of the organizations that are against our police, but the article on the very back of it deals with why they want to federalize the police and the dangers of it. They're free. The committee made them available to us. And so pick one up on your way out. There's some brochures out there on Support Your Local Police also. Okay, do I have everybody's ticket? Okay. Well, first of all, we have DVD, The Principles of the Constitution, 9-part series. It's a total of 75 minutes, so each series moves along pretty quick, but it gets to the meat of the whole thing. Bill, since you're our guest, if you'll just pick one of these out, and we'll see who wins it. Okay. Thank you. Last three numbers are 237. 237. Yeah, we'll start.
You got it? You got the number?
The last three numbers, 237?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good. Great.
That's what it says here. It's
Is this about killing communists?
Okay, and we have DVD here on local police versus national police. And then another segment of it is what's happening to our police. And this is, just came out, and it's kind of a briefing that you give somebody to make them aware of the police problem. And we'll give that to 261.
Yeah.
There he is. Well, it's important what you do with this information now. Stop by at the table back there, load up. Carl, thank you for giving us a report. And we'll let you know about next month's meeting. We may get into some of the ballot box fraud next month, and we'll let you know. We also are going to try to get some kind of report this spring from somebody from the state legislature or has their eyes and ears on the legislature, what we're facing with in the last couple months on legislation. Right now, it's just kind of a whirl. Everything's being filed and assigned to committees, so we have to start watching it here pretty soon as it starts moving through. And there is one thing we do need to watch, is there may be a move to the left to try to, this is kind of weird what they're trying to do. Back in the early years, the Equal Rights Amendment was brought up by the women's movement, I guess you can say. And we got involved in fighting it, so did Phyllis Schlafly with the Eagle Forum. And short and bold story, it didn't find its way into reality. Part of Texas, what Texas did is they said that they gave a deadline when it would be dead in Texas, which I believe was March of '69. And Texas said that we were going to do anything to do it, and they're telling it here in March of '69, that's it. Well, it seems to be that there's some people on the left wants to say that, well, because other states have, a couple other states are bringing it up for a vote, that Texas can't do this, so they're going to have to bring it up for a vote again, and to vote, have a vote to undo that killing of it back then. We're kind of going around it about a different way. Anyway, we're watching that real close to see if anything develops on that. We haven't seen anybody yet that just filed any kind of bill for that regard, but we'll keep you informed on it. So, spread the word, write letters to the editor, get on the phone, talk to people. You have a policeman, talk to them, let them know we're behind them and beside them, and pick up the literature you need over there, and be sure to read your next month's bulletin. Thank you.
Okay.
Recorded.